Good evening, everyone, or morning, it might be for some of you. Welcome to our Berean Bible study. I'm your host tonight, Granville McKenzie. Glad to be back together around the Word of God. And we had some fun last time with our introduction to Ecclesiastes, and we're going to pick up in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, starting at verse 12, and we will take off from there. Of course, we will pray before we begin, and so let's just take this time now and talk to the Lord in prayer. Lord, we worship you today, and we thank you again for your goodness to us, your grace, your mercy, your love, your care, your compassion, your kindness, everything that you do for us, everything you are to us, the fact that you have opened your arms to receive us and welcome us into your presence. And we always ask you for your help at this time to open our hearts, our eyes, and our understanding, because we are so limited, but we know that you are limitless and you can help us and you can draw us close and you can teach us the things we need to know. And so we look to you and bless you and thank you as we devote this time to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So we spoke last time about the whole concept of Ecclesiastes, the assembler of these writings, and just talked about some of the thoughts that many have had toward authorship of this book. And the first 11 verses in this first chapter would seem to be a bit of a what we might call just a prelude, a bit of an executive summary of what is to come, the kind of thought process that leads into this discussion and this thinking. So now we get into the main crux of it, shall we say, as we look at the preacher again. Kohelet, as you've seen that name, we talked about last week, the Hebrew rendering of Ecclesiastes, and so we start at verse 12. Now, we do need to really participate together and help each other through this. There's a lot of stuff reading through there. As far as commentaries go, there are folks who have a lot of technical things to say that I actually didn't find super helpful. Not as helpful as just taking our time to read through this. And as I mentioned last week, this probably is a little more reader response oriented than other books may be. But there are some things, as we will see fairly quickly, that really indicate the flow of thought of the assembler of this Ecclesiastes writer, and so let's all put our best foot forward as far as helping each other through this. Now, we just as far as what we gained from our last lesson, I think we can bring it all together very quickly in one line, which would be chapter 1, verse 9, the end of verse 9. There is nothing new under the sun. So all of the things that were written just talk about the consistency and sort of everlasting nature of the things that happen, and then it culminates there at the end of verse 9. There is nothing new under the sun. And then it goes on to say in a fairly pessimistic sort of way that we know there's nothing new, but at the same time, guess what? People don't really remember much of what happened in the past. Verse 11, there's no remembrance of earlier things. And so we, in our day and time, have the phrase that if you don't learn from history, you're destined to repeat it. And why was that statement made? Well, because a lot of people don't learn from history. And so we want to be able to learn from the things that have happened, understanding that we're not really charting any new territory, nothing new under the sun. But that line also is going to be very important for us going forward. As I mentioned, that term under the sun really is speaking about things that happen on this earth. This book has a very terra firma focus. It's really speaking about what's happening on this earth. So we're going to see that at times there are correlations between things that happen on earth and things that happen beyond this earth, but the real focus is this under the sun. This is what we find to be reality on earth as far as we can figure out, or certainly the wisest of us have figured out in going through this reading of how things actually work here. And then I think it's good for us to sort of make some of these judgments as to whether we just want to accept what is written and knowing sort of the background of the writing, and where we want to input some new information or some other information, which comes to us from the pages of Scripture that really indicate to us that all of life is not just what is under the sun. There is more to it than that. And we will definitely need to keep that very much in mind as we go forward. So 1 and 12, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realized that this also is striving after wind. Because in much wisdom, there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. I should mention, I am reading from my old fave right now, the New American Standard Bible. This is my good old Allen Bible, if you can see that there. Allen is one of my favorite Bible makers. Allen, and there's what's my other favorite one? Name just slips me. Dutch company. Oh, goodness, the brain. It'll come to me in a second. But I'm reading this in NASB because I like the literal translations, and this has sort of done a lot of the work in getting back to some of the earliest manuscripts, and not even manuscripts, copies and fragments that we have available. And Schuyler, thank you very much, Sister Susan, Schuyler. I don't know how I could have forgotten that. So Schuyler Bibles actually are probably the best made as far as the binding and stitching and all of that. But Allen is right up there, and I just happen to love this NASB version. So it either this, or as we typically would read in church, the New King James Version have very good notes attached to them. So if there are variant readings, usually you will find those in the notes. So either one I find really good. There are other translations we've talked about before when you're looking for something that's what we would call it dynamically equivalent. NIV is a great Bible for that, and probably nowadays the best seller, even though we have the English Standard Version and CEV and all of this, still NIV, as far as a dynamic equivalent version goes, is very good. And as far as literal translations go, certainly we're not going to do much better than NASB or New King James. But you do need to read the marginal notes as you go through, because sometimes there is very important information there. Now, we have read chapter 1, Ecclesiastes 1, and 12 to 18, and I do want to have us sort of get a sense or feel. Some of you may have actually had the chance to jump in as I suggested and try to, oops, sorry, hit my computer, read through the whole thing to get a real good idea of what is going on. Some of you have not, but you're going to really start immediately to get a feel for what is happening in the writer's brain. Verse 12 is just the introductory autobiographical kind of note. And then verse 13, I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. So the writer here is saying, look, I have really put my mind to it, having the greatest wisdom available, and certainly thinking of Solomon, if he is the author, being one who God described as the wisest who ever lived, and there is none before or after in his particular category. And so this wise man has set his mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. And he describes this now as a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. Now, different versions may just have different words translated in that use different words, but I think we get the idea pretty quickly that that when we set about trying to understand the world and everything in it by wisdom, it is going to be a task, and it is going to really, in the description of the writer, it's like this is tough. It's like an affliction. Sister Elise.
Just a question. When it's in some versions, it's a little less clear, but is it when it says God has given people this miserable task to keep them occupied? The ESV says it is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of men to be busy with. And I was listening to the ESV and was wondering whether it just applies just to the pursuit of wisdom, or whether it applies to just man's life on earth. But it sounds like you're saying it's just about the pursuit of wisdom.
Well, I'm just sort of reading the flow of the verse and even what has come before. This is talking about setting his mind. This is talking about a deliberate action set his mind, seek and explore by wisdom. So this isn't just, okay, because as we know, a lot of people certainly don't set their minds to seek and explore the things of this world. So, but at the same time, it says this is a task given to the sons of men. And now, whether that is to all the sons of men or just using sons of men to say, well, as far as being a human being, this is sort of the kind of thing we do. Yeah, I think the main point is just to say that this study, this exploration, is actually quite difficult, and verse 18 sort of culminates that in saying, in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. So it's like the deeper you go, and again, keep in mind, this is a writing about what is happening under the sun. And we will see as we go along that there's a lot that sort of eliminates the divine perspective. We will see the divine perspective from time to time, but this really does seem to be the writing of a very wise, very cynical, very really cynicism and a caustic kind of attitude, and saying, I'm trying to do my best to understand this by wisdom, and it's just increasing my pain. Now, some of you may have experienced thinking hard through things or observing situations and people and really wondering, why do people do what they do, and why are things the way they are? And it's in many ways, we say, you know what, ignorance really is bliss. The more you know, it seems the more we see things that we don't like, and we will certainly come up against it in this book. So
yeah, I and the part that I was thinking was whether or not it's referring to just man's futile life kind of thing. And I think it was substantiated because my Bible happened to have a reference to Genesis 3:19 that said, by the sweat of your face you will eat bread till you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So that kind of emphasized that question again, whether it was just wisdom he was talking about, the pursuit of wisdom, or whether he was also referring back to all the futility he had been talking about previously.
Yeah, and I think as we go through, we will see that, like coming up very quickly, we will see that he is talking about everything, not just the pursuit of wisdom, but the pursuit of understanding of everything that happens under the sun, and how he went about trying to come to an understanding of these things. And as we get into chapter 2, we will see that starting to play out very clearly. So in verse 14, for instance, I've seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. So even here, he's again broadening it, and his conclusion, as we are here at the start of the book, we are seeing already some of the kind of conclusions he has come to, that everything, all the works, everything that's done under the sun is just vanity and striving after wind. Now, I think one thing the way he has put it is, try and catch wind. It's just impossible. We are striving after something that is unattainable. And so all is vanity, as we discussed, futile, meaningless, without a value. All the things we do in this earth are ultimately without value and striving after something unattainable. And so again, we can see that this is being written very much with a mindset that is eliminating God. And that might seem very strange, but I think that's part of the power of this book, to say, okay, if we are dealing with secular people and those who do not acknowledge God as the divine creator, I think this book is here to give us, if no one else, an understanding of how people apart from God think and feel. And when the wisest people on earth really put their minds to trying to figure this thing out, it's like a sickness, an affliction. And everything they do is striving after something meaningless that is unattainable. Unattainable meaninglessness. That's pretty sad. And so I won't dwell here, because we will see this play out in so much of what follows. And so it's like, even if you try to fix something, verse 15, the crooked can't be straightened, and if something is lacking, it can't be replenished or filled. So we're always in imperfection and lack. Verse 16, okay, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. So this is the writer giving his credentials. Look, there's nobody who can give you more information on this than me, because that's the level of wisdom and understanding that I have, more than any who have come before. And so understand that. And I have looked at all of this and realized in verse 17, whether it's madness, wisdom, or madness and folly, I've looked at it all, and everything is striving after wind. So here he's saying, if I'm going after wisdom, it's vanity, it's folly, it's striving after wind. If I go after madness and folly, it's striving after wind. So everything, as it says right from verse 1, everything is vanity. So now, I mean, you're getting a very, very cynical conclusion. It doesn't matter if you are wise or a fool. Everything is vanity and striving after wind. If you have a lot of wisdom, all it's going to do is to increase your grief. And if you increase knowledge, all that does is make your pain greater. So to belabor this point, remember that this is being written with a very secular, from a very secular standpoint. If this is truly Solomon, some folks have used parts of the book to try to say, oh, this is sort of Solomon's repentance letter before he died. I totally don't believe that. It's like when it gets to the last chapter, let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. There are those who have felt, okay, this is Solomon trying to make amends and sort of give us his thought process, his philosophy, and all of that, and trying to make good before he died. There's certainly nothing in First Kings, as we have read about his end, his death, that indicated that he was no longer on the throne, or that he ever turned away from his apostasy. In fact, to the contrary, it says when he was old, his wives turned his heart away from God, and he facilitated incredible idolatry and false worship in Israel. So what he's saying here, again, this Ecclesiastes assembler is that everything from wisdom to folly is nothing but vanity and chasing after wind. So let me just stop here at the end of chapter 1. Anything that anyone would like to throw in at this point? Go ahead, Brother Adrian.
Pastor, in your study, just as far as this first chapter is concerned, were there any links, and how strong are the links between this and Genesis, where Adam and Eve choose to look away from God and towards the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Were there any links that you found to that?
No, but I think as we go through something like this and go to the time when humanity fell from the perfection that God had given them in the garden, albeit without the knowledge of good and evil, it is quite when you see even their response after realizing that they were naked and hiding from God and all this, you start to see a whole downward spiral. With the knowledge that they had just gained, it did nothing to elevate them. It did everything to diminish them to the point where they would die. And we're going to see that kind of thought process come up quite clearly in Ecclesiastes. Everything we do just leads to death, and that's the final end. So we will come up against that in our reading tonight. So but nothing that I read was really trying to tie those two situations together.
One of the things that the header in my version that I'm reading, above verse 12, it says the limitations of wisdom. And so I think when he's talking about, obviously the writer doesn't have God's wisdom, he doesn't have access to it, but I think it's important to remember he's talking about the limits of human wisdom, that we still have so much that we could try to learn, but it's not going to, it's just, and I think of the saying that it says, what you don't know won't hurt you. And as you read his verse 18, where he says, for with much wisdom is much sorrow, as knowledge increases, grief increases.
I in my particular Bible, the heading for that section is the futility of wisdom. One says that, and different Bibles will have different headings. But I think, certainly the limitation is evident, and the futility of it is what the writer is saying he has found, because I've gone through all of this, and in the end, the more wisdom I have, the more pain I have. So not a very promising start as far as that goes in my view. This truly is a pretty depressing start to this investigation. However, we will motor on.
Sister Susan had her hand up.
Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead, Sister Susan.
No worries. My heading says the grief of wisdom, so different than both of yours, and that's actually what I was focused on, because verse 18 says, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. And I was thinking that it's not even so much the amount of wisdom that you have, but any wisdom you gain, like ignorance is bliss, right? Wisdom has responsibility, and it has weight, and it has other, things about it that are painful sometimes, right? So I was looking at it more, I guess this kind of guided me more towards the grief part of wisdom.
Yeah, so again, there's so much we can pull out of this. So far, nothing positive, but it's all I think we're getting a picture of what the writer is trying to present here. So let's move on to chapter 2. And this is a fairly long reading now, 1 to 11, but let's read this section. Ecclesiastes 2, 1 to 11. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, while my mind, or some versions will say heart, while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of their lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself, from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. And I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and increased, more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Okay, first impressions. What's hitting you from this reading? Anybody?
I would say what actually hit me right away was this person has done pretty much everything you could think of, and they just still sound empty. And what actually hits me is without God, it's all useless, because he's done everything, like everything you can imagine. He said in verse 10, he denied himself nothing his eyes desired, and yet you can hear the unhappiness and the emptiness in his writing.
No, that's excellent. I'm glad you grabbed that. Sister Deanne, please.
So I also think, to add to what Brother James is saying, the idea that he set out to do all these things and he did it reinforces an idea that's in the world right now that, I don't need God. I can accomplish all these worldly things on my own. And so, that's a big belief that's being sold now, the whole idea of belief in self, and, you can do all these things. And so the writer here talked about, okay, I'm going to do this, and he did them, but yes, you may be able to do all these things on your own, but what does it mean in the end, right? And so it just links right back into James's idea. It's like, yeah, go ahead, do it, but that hole will still be there. You'll still be empty and not fulfilled.
Yep. So nothing has changed so far from chapter 1 into chapter 2. Go ahead, Sister Rose. Sister Rose, you are, okay, your mic's open, but I'm not hearing you. Okay, Sister Elise, until she's ready.
Okay, a few things came to mind in this chapter that I'd never really noticed. Number one, and I agree with everything that's been said already, but my perspective of it was like test number one. Let me test out pleasure.
Mhm.
How will this hold up? And then an interesting line at the end was, I've worked for this. I deserve it.
Mhm.
I mean, why should I withhold anything from myself? I earned it.
Mhm.
And then I don't want to come back on later on in the chapter, so I'll just mention what came to me later on. I started thinking when he's talking about it, the sons and the this and the that makes it obvious that it's not Solomon himself talking. I all of a sudden got an image in my mind of a school assignment where they tell you to put yourself in the position of a person and then write as if you were that person.
Mhm.
And it almost seems to me like this book started seeming to me like that assignment that somebody got. And so now somebody has put themselves in the mind of Solomon and is trying to express what Solomon might have been like, even maybe trying to explain what Solomon was trying to do. I don't know, just all kinds of things that could be happening, but the idea of somebody else writing it and thinking back actually has made me understand the book in a slightly different way when that came to my mind.
Mhm. Good. Thank you. Sister Rose, are you, Sister Rosemary, can we hear you now? Try again.
Can you hear me?
No, I barely. Now I just heard a little something coming through. I don't know if you are far away from your mic, but I just heard a little whisper there.
Okay. I'm agreeing with all the other speaker, but what jumped out at me?
Yeah, it's wow. Yeah,
Still can't hear
just
it.
try that again. It's like it really sounds. It's just a tiny whisper that and I've got my volume way up. I don't know if you're using a mic or something, but try one more time, please.
I was saying Solomon was just saying, I. He did not acknowledge God.
Okay. I heard one point you were making, which is a very critical point. Um, if you look at verse 4 and from verse 4 to verse 8, 6 times you see this phrase, I did this for myself. I made gardens and verse 4, I made houses, built houses for myself, vineyards for myself, parks for myself, ponds of water for myself. Verse 8, silver and gold for myself, male and female singers for myself. And of course, in verse 8, the pleasures of men, many concubines. And I mean, he just did it to the max, 700 wives and 300 concubines. That's so every sexual pleasure I went after, money, silver and gold I went after, the service of others, male and female slaves I went after, the beauty of nature, gardens and parks. I did the most beautiful houses and food, the vineyards, and drink. Of course, vineyards, you often think more of drink than certainly food. I did everything for myself. And again, I think this is a critical point in the thinking of the writer. And the fact that this is not written with God in view. I did this for me, and so yeah, Sister Carol, a whole lot of self-glorification. It really is a sad commentary when you see this. Sister Green, go ahead, please. Okay, you're still muted if you're trying to speak.
This rich
There you go.
king who knows everything, he's a wise man. what came out to me, he's very candid because
Mhm.
he's a speaker of the house of life. And he is just saying it, he nailed it.
Mhm.
And remember, he spoke as one who is under the sun, S-U-N, he's earthly.
Yep.
He has no time to really think about things pertaining to God. So he's allowed to speak the way he's speaking.
Mhm.
But this is what is coming out at me. You know, he's just a wise king,
Mhm.
has everything this world affords,
Mhm.
but he is just full of himself
Mhm.
because he's speaking as under the sun, not under the S-O-N. So
Mhm. Excellent, excellent. This is exactly what I was hoping for. Just these raw responses,
right.
reading a section like this. So no, this is all very good. Sister Mitzi, go ahead, please.
Okay, what jumped out at me was verse 3 at the end, where he said he sees every opportunity to do things which he regarded as foolishness. And down in verse 10, he actually felt pleased with what he was doing because of his labor. And yet he referred to it as that's foolishness.
So you see the kind of tension that's going on in his mind. In verse 10, everything my eyes desired. I absolutely didn't refuse myself anything that my heart desired, for or because my heart was pleased because of all my labor. So someone said it, of course, a little earlier. I've worked hard. I deserve this. I've earned this. So he went after everything, withheld nothing, and so it's as if while he was doing this, he was having the pleasure, as the scripture says, of Moses. He didn't want to be an Egyptian, called an Egyptian, and enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, right? Because if anyone tells you there's no pleasure in sin, well, I guess they haven't sinned. There is pleasure in sin for a season. Now, when the season was over, you come to verse 11. So I considered all my activities, all my labors, everything my hands had done. And at the end of the day, I'm right back to the conclusion I've already told you folks. It is all vanity. It is all futile. It is all meaningless. It is striving after wind. You're trying to catch wind. You can't catch the wind. So really, as we have gone through this section, he just now starts to enumerate the things he has done. So I think most of us can say, I actually was quite intrigued with verse 3. I explored with my mind, okay, so with his wisdom, his intellect, how do I stimulate my body with wine? Okay, I'm going to enjoy this pleasure and get the stimulating effect of it while still having my wisdom intact, getting to that point of drunkenness, but not losing control. His wisdom was there, with his mind guiding him wisely. And how do I take hold of folly and still have wisdom guiding me? And he said, look, I'm only here for a short time, so I'm just going to eat, drink, and be merry and all that. I just found that really intriguing. I know that I'm coming to the edge of my ability to sort of keep it together. But his wisdom, there's another verse, verse 9, that just talks about how great and increased he was. But at the end, he says, my wisdom also stood by me. So when you're talking about wisdom, and as Sister Elise was saying, this again, as you read through some of this, it would kind of indicate, okay, there's someone who is using Solomon's voice very effectively. And we discussed that last week, some of the other scriptures that indicated that it gave reasons why there are some who certainly believe quite strongly, and with good reason, that this wasn't Solomon, but someone writing in his voice, doing what the scholars would call a fictional autobiography. It's written as an autobiography, but it's not really, it's fictional, but it's pulling up all the stuff that Solomon did, wise beyond measure, still coming to the same conclusion as we saw in 117. Set my mind to know wisdom, madness and folly. It's all striving after wind, and we have that coming up again in 2:11. So, Sister Elise.
Sorry, I didn't want to come back on, but this thing about this, it's and I know it's in there, and I think I've seen it, but the idea of this being presented as a deliberate experiment, like it just wasn't happenstance, that it's like, let me see what will happen if I do this.
Yep.
It's just really interesting to think of it so starkly that way.
This was not happenstance. This was very planned and deliberate. So let's read 12 to 17, the next little section. Ecclesiastes 2, 12 to 17. So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will a man do who will come after the king, except what has already been done? And I saw that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity, for there's no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten, and how the wise man and the fool alike die. So I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after wind. Are we getting the message? I think it was Brother James who said before, and that's, I hope I'm giving the right attribution here, or Sister Deanne, one of folks. You know what? Do it all. Just go for broke. Just do it all. He has come to a conclusion in verse 13. Okay, wisdom does exceed folly, as light excels. Wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. It's better to see where you're going than not to be able to see where you're going, as he continues in verse 14. Wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Okay, I totally admit wisdom is much better than folly. But guess what? At the end of the day, one fate befalls them both. We talked about that a little earlier, that this is part of the frustration of this wise thinker, this philosopher, at the end of the day, what does it really matter? Because we all die. And this we will see just keep repeating itself. So as in verse 15, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. So why then have I been extremely wise? So I said this too is vanity. It's meaningless, it's pointless, it's striving after wind, it's just crazy. So this is about as bad as it gets in verse 17. So I hated life. For the work which has been done under the sun was grievous to me. Now, we talked about the pleasure that he got from work up in verse 10, but now you see the flip side. There is that momentary pleasure, the accomplishment, the plaudits, the hurrahs, but when it comes right down to it, guess what? Wise or fool, you're going to die, and all this labor that you've done brought him to a point of actually hating life. And this was grievous. Everything is futility and striving after wind. Okay, any thoughts that you have on this section, 12 to 17? Okay, don't see a hand up, so we're going to go from 18 to 26 to the end of the chapter. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. Therefore, I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. For there's a man who has labored with wisdom, when there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. For what does a man get in all his labor and in his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days, his task is painful and grievous. Even at night, his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. There's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. Oh, God makes an appearance. How nice. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? Good question. For to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner, he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after wind. Okay, so what are you seeing here? What are you hearing? Anyone can go, because if you don't, then I will have to speak, and I like to hear your voices too. Okay, so as we read this, we see this hate word come up again. In verse 17, I hated life. 18, I hated all the fruit of my labor. And why now? He's thinking this through. He says, look at all I have done. Look at everything I have put my hand to. And certainly using Solomon as a background or an example for this writing, you can't do much more than Solomon did. And of course, I think first and foremost of the temple, which was one of the wonders of the ancient world, it was beyond spectacular. I mean, there's no way we can in any way imagine what it would be like to see a gold building glistening in the sun to the point where one couldn't look at it if the sun was shining on it, polished to the highest degree, and inside and out just overlaid with gold. Insane amounts of money spent on this. I shouldn't say insane. If it's for the glory of God, that's this was Solomon's and by extension Israel's expression of what they felt God was worth. But certainly, I think we can all say if it wasn't for the kind of brain that Solomon had to put this together, they would have built a very nice temple, but nothing like what Solomon did. So now he's saying all of this is going, I'm going to leave it all behind. I can't take a thing with me. Just like the fool dies, I'm going to die. Everything I have done, I'm going to leave behind. And here will come some fool after me and have everything I've done. Hasn't worked a second, hasn't done a thing to earn this, and it will all go to those who come after who have done nothing. So 22, for what does a man get in all his labor and in his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous, and in the end it all goes to somebody else, and he can't even sleep at night. He's staying up thinking about, okay, I've got to do this, got to do that, and it is vanity. So we get to the end of verse 23, and then it seems that in searching for some meaning, something to take it out of this depressive striving after wind, vanity, all this that we've been reading so far, there's a switch, and now there's this little insertion that indicates that this wise man is not unaware that there is more to life than what he's been talking about. So he concludes, there is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. Maslow and Hertzberg, did their hierarchy of needs, and the top level is what they call self-actualization. You do something that really stretches you and takes you to the limit of your talents and abilities, and you get there, and then there's that moment similar to what Genesis 2 talks about, where God, start of Genesis 2, it's not the tail end of Genesis 1, where God finished his work and then he rested. And so when you look at that, you quickly realize, I just want to make sure I was giving you the right reference. All the creation stuff in Genesis 1, and then at the start of chapter 2, we see 2 and 2, by the seventh day, God completed his work, which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work, which he had done. So in trying to correlate Sabbath to God, knowing that, God is not flesh and bone, he doesn't need physical rest. The thought process of a lot of thinkers is that, okay, it's not a physical rest for God, it's the rest of accomplishment. I have done a good job, and now I sit back and observe it with satisfaction. And so, of course, I thought of this when I saw my wife deliver our first child. It was labor, capital L. And then after the labor was done, there was the rest of accomplishment. It's over, it's done. And looking at our son, it was like, yes, and it was worth it. So it seems in verse 24 now, he is talking about this, looking at your labor and in yourself deeming it to be good. So from a secular standpoint, you can sort of see how this makes sense. Okay, I know that my labor doesn't go with me. I know that I will leave all of this for somebody else, but at least let me do this because it means something to me. I can take pleasure in work that I've done and know that I have done good work. So this is sort of the self-actualization thing where you are talking to yourself and telling yourself and feeling in yourself you've done a good job. And then he says, I see that this self-actualization, this ability to appreciate one's own work is from the hand of God. So he talked about what mankind has gotten from the hand of God to be exercised in seeking after wisdom and understanding of the world, and that's grievous. And now he's saying, well, you are permitted to enjoy the fruit of your labor, to eat and to drink, and to tell yourself and in your own mind feel that you have done a good job. This is from the hand of God. And then he continues in 25 to say, who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? So the ability to enjoy the fruit of your labor comes from God himself. This is from the hand of God. So he continues in this vein in 26, for to a person who is good in his sight. Now, all of a sudden, I'm not sure how he, and why he just jumped to this God portion, because now, as we have read up to this point, it seems a little out of place with a cynical kind of responses we've had so far. But now he's saying, for one who is good in God's sight, he gives them wisdom and knowledge and joy. Well, that's, again, an interesting word based on what we have read up to this point. So if you are good in God's sight, you can labor, you can enjoy the fruit of your labor, you can eat and drink and feel that sense of accomplishment, and you can have joy, as Brother Adrian was just saying, that actually is one of the things that that we receive as part of the package when we receive the Spirit of God in our lives: righteousness, peace, and joy. And so certainly this is a gift from God, and the writer has now come to this point of understanding. And so sinners, he's saying, work and gather and collect and get all this together. Why? Just so he can give it to one who is good in God's sight. May it be in Jesus' name. I can use some of that. Maybe some of you can too. But this is his conclusion of this particular section of thought. Vanity, 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 striving after wind, all this happening under the sun. I die just like the fool. But then we get to this 3-verse section at the end of this first contemplation that says, hey, you know what? Don't forget God, because You can only derive enjoyment and pleasure through him. Okay, any thoughts?
I find it interesting that for most of the first 2 chapters, he talks about the pursuit of wisdom seems useless and futile. But then when you get to where we are in verse 26, he said, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. And it's like he clued in that if I'm trying to pursue this wisdom on my own, it's a waste of my time. I just need to go to God, and God will give me wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. So it's kind of funny that he's complained all of this time about the pursuit of wisdom, and then he just clues in and go, you know what? I shouldn't even be pursuing it because God gives wisdom.
Yep. So actually, I think we'll see now that there comes a little turn as we go forward, that we actually are going to see a little more of that shift toward that thought process that there is more to life than this. Don't forget God. So this is a pivotal section here. Sister Juliet.
Yes, I'm thinking maybe the part of chapter 1 and 2 was to warn us and to remind us that wisdom and everything comes from God. And when we get these blessings or gift, not to forget who they come from and to give credit to our blessed Lord. Because when we are taking all the credits ourselves, then we are locking him out. And this could be what the chapter 1 and this part of chapter 2 is warning us all about.
And so that comment now you're making, Sister Juliet, is of course indicating, okay, is this really teaching us theology, teaching us about God, which of course the Bible clearly, theology being the study of God, that's what the Bible is all about. And so we're coming at it from a different perspective here, coming at it from saying, after looking at the humanistic side and seeing all of the failure and futility and vanity of that, it turns our mind to God to really see that all of this that I have done for myself, as we read, and not to engage in numerology right now, but 6 is the number of man, and 666 we see as a number of man in Revelation, and 6 times we have this "for myself" phrase between chapter 2, between verse 4 and verse 8. So and counting them, I thought, well, isn't that funny that this is repeated 6 times, man's effort to do everything for himself. That's the number of man. Well, what brings any meaning to this? Finally, we have something now that's saying, do your work, enjoy your work, eat and drink. This is actually a gift from the hand of God. If you can feel good about yourself, great. I mean, who doesn't want to feel good about themselves and what they do? If you go to work 8 hours, 10 hours a day, and you go in feeling lousy and you come out feeling lousy, that this has been a complete, utter waste of your time, energy, and effort, that's horrible. If you can go to work and feel energized that I'm doing something that I feel is meaningful, that I think elevates me, hey, this is a gift from God, and enjoy that labor. And because I actually have a star in my Bible beside verse 25, for who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? I find that very, very instructive. So that one I had to put a star beside. We can't enjoy life, as this secular humanist is telling us. You can't enjoy life to the full without God. You can have temporary pleasure, but you cannot truly enjoy life without God and the gift he gives us of joy, wisdom, knowledge, all these things that are good for us. Any other thought before we, oh man, I don't know what to do now. We only have 20 minutes left. I think we can, we'll have time to just touch on chapter 3. But before we do that, any concluding thoughts on chapter 2?
There is a question in the chat. Could the turnaround be the narrator editorializing?
Well, that's now, I again, that's a good thought. I hadn't thought of it in that term, because it's like there's a prologue and a prelude and what do you call the end? Postlude. That comes in chapter epilogue. Thank you. And so it seems the epilogue comes in 12:9 to 14. But I have no issue with thinking that this could be just an insertion before we get to the poem at the start of chapter 3, where the Colette is just saying, okay, enough, man, this is too much. We better throw something in. So that's a very good thought. I hadn't thought of that, but it could very well be that editorial comment. And this happens from time to time. I have often thought of reading Genesis chapter 2 and a similar thing where from 21 to 25 or 24, the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. He slept. He took one of his ribs, closed up the flesh. The Lord fashioned into a woman the rib which he had taken from the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." And then I think 24, Genesis 2:24 is just a similar thing, editorial comment by Moses. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Well, at this point, Adam and Eve knew nothing about father and mother and families and leaving father and mother. So I think this was Moses just sort of throwing this in as an editorial comment. And so I think this could well be a similar kind of thing. Thank you for that thought. I think that's actually very very likely what's happening here. Anything else? Okay. I am hesitating. I hate to start the new chapter and then sort of leave it midway, but at least let's read the first 10 verses. Maybe your Bible sort of starts a new section there, as mine does, but let's do this. And the other reason is that this is very, very familiar to us. For those of us at Faith Sanctuary, we actually heard this in the message last Sunday, and so it's fresh in our minds. But and I think Sister Elisa's point about the compiler just sort of putting this editorial comment in may just be a prelude also to this, I would call it a poem that we have here. Chapter 3, there's an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing, a time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What profit is there to the worker from that in which he toils? I have seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. Okay, we're back, back into the pit. But the understanding here is that, okay, time for wisdom, you might say, a time for folly, a time for working hard, and a time for slacking off, and a time to understand human wisdom, and a time to see it from God's perspective. So this is obviously meant to be presenting a more balanced view of life, simply to say, and all of this, understand that everything is appropriate at a certain time. And having said all that, I'm now back to my thought process, or maybe if we, I actually going to check to see on this particular thing if there's some other support to Sister Elisa's point from commentators, that this is just a little insertion in the middle of this, and then the speaker just goes back into chapter 3 and comes to the same old conclusion that we're now used to, that it's just this wisdom thing and this work hard and get no profit thing is just the writer continuing on in that vein. So that gives me a little homework, because I really had not considered that point before. So that's I think we will just leave that section in your thinking. Any last point anyone wants to make before we close tonight? But we're going to pick up at 3:11 next week and just carry on as far as we get to. Everybody okay? This making sense? Any testimonies of anything you're picking up, or anything that's sort of making sense to you, Sister Susan?
I think verse 3:10 there, I've seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. It kind of reminded me of chapter 1, verse 13. I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that's done. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of men. So it makes me think of that task as being the task of living.
Well, yeah, and I think we're seeing now that the concepts that this thinker has just keep repeating, right? It's not like he's writing about stuff that's just sort of appeared to him. You can see that when someone is repeating something over and over, it's deeply ingrained. And so from the standpoint of what we might call secular humanism, this is how a secular humanist thinks, and this is the thought process that they go through, and coming out of the grief of that, he's back to the same thing in verse 10. I've seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. In this case, he doesn't finish the thought, having laid it out previously in 113. But if you just sort of, he's referring us back to that, really, to say it's grievous, it's tough. So it's no fun being a humanist. It's no fun eliminating God. In the end, it's a very depressive thought process. Anybody else? Brother Adrian.
Is that forward reverse motion that we've already seen? I think when you sit and you read the book end to end in one sitting, you experience those kind of pulsations through the book, because the author is aware of God and God's place. And so, you know, every so often he attributes that to God. And of course, he ends up by saying, listen, okay, hands down, the solution is to go God's way. So I certainly enjoy that, because it speaks to my life experience and of many people that I've spoken to. It's the tension that not just the secular humanist deals with, or maybe we are secular humanists, but I think it's a tension that many people I've had the opportunity to talk a little bit more deeply about life about. They kind of grapple with that, and so very practical, I thought.
Yeah, and certainly we will see this come up again in the latter part of chapter 3. It certainly looks like a door has been opened in 2:24 to 26 to bring God in, and we will see this playing out in the latter half of chapter 3 again. But I like that. That's a good term, the pulsations that is going through, and when we see this, it's not at all to say that it's a contradiction. It's just the reality of how our minds work, and we are living through these seasons, ups and downs, and trying to make sense of it all. But yeah, we will continue on and introduce a little more of the God perspective as we go forward, certainly even in chapter 3. Oh, that's good. That's good. So I as I often say, I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am, because as we go through this together, it's opening things up to me, and in a better way. And I hope you're having the same experience. So just read on as far as you can. If you haven't read through the whole thing, just carry on. Try to read as much as you can in one sitting, to see, as Brother Adrian was saying, that the pulsations in it. That's a good way to think of it. And we will look forward to jumping back on it next week, same time, same station. And until then, God be with you.
Bye.